And I want to touch on where I really had an aha moment that can culminate with mature deer. If you're really looking for a mature buck on public land, I know it's so simple and it's so stupid, but you just have to base what you're doing, no matter what, off the wind. The wind and even to that the thermals, but wind is so key. And really what I mean by that is I was noticing between what Dan has taught everybody, obviously he's a huge pioneer with the wind, but watching that and then watching how bucks were moving and then getting the ability, because I was in Iowa, to occasionally see that mature buck doing something at range, at distance, and observing what they were doing. I just noticed that wind was everything. These bucks on public land, they live and die by the wind, and the ones that don't obviously die faster and so they don't get quite as big as some of these bucks. And obviously there's always a chance. Everything's situational. Every buck is situational. They all have slightly different personalities, and there's times of the rut when you can catch them lacking and whatnot. But kind of tying into the wind situation, one, I want to touch on this buck. I killed him or harvested him off of a long line, which is something that I've really noticed. Now, that doesn't really have to do with the wind too much. It more has to do with finding bucks that have to move longer ranges to food. Usually those bucks get on their feet earlier and they move faster through the timber. So they cover more distance in the daylight.
I'm going to stop you right there. Just for folks listening, I've heard you talk about this before, but when you say bucks have to move longer distances, why are you finding it? Why is that deer choosing to move a longer distance and expend that energy versus finding a place to bed that's closer to his food source?
Usually it comes down to two factors: high quality food and pressure. So predominantly, I've seen mature bucks lay closer to the high quality food, but whether that buck is ultra aggressive and that buck has that, maybe that is the primo bedding, because it is so close. It's only a ridge or two from the primo food. Everything that so again, this is really controversial. Everything I do is really tied to food. And I know that's such a private land guy thing to say, and it is, but that's again where I came from Michigan, was the ag country and whatnot. And so I'm not the best acorn hunter, but I really key in on food. So if there's an area that has zero agriculture to even count hay fields, I probably don't hunt it. When I was in Wisconsin, even the marshes that I was hunting, there was agriculture up front. Where I killed my 2-year-old in some of that more rugged hill country, there was agriculture again off the public. And so I was always, correlating that. So, what could you drop me into the Appalachian Mountains or northern Wisconsin, the UP or Minnesota, and would I do good in true big woods? Probably not. But
having that dominant food source to correlate some sort of movement
exactly
off of is what's guiding your basic ideas.
1,000%. And I'm one that I'll run cameras, and I've talked about this too. I'll run cameras really close to the roads where bucks are coming out of public, going into private ag, or just around main food sources, because in Iowa we do get food sources on the public here. And everybody gets those nighttime photos, but I have kind of played the game of, based off of Dan's teachings and Jake Bush and all these other guys, but the wind-based bedding. If you just look wind-based bedding, just the concept of wind-based bedding, a lot of times running those cameras on the food, which again is less pressure on the bucks. You're not, you're scaring them kind of off the food in the daylight hours, but I'm not hunting them in the daylight hours on the food sources regardless. So it doesn't matter. The only time you're doing that is maybe in the late season if you're on a specific food source that's really low pressure and you have a really good front coming in. That one, we'll get to it. But so past that though, it's you got to understand the wind-based bedding. So I always, I'm not ashamed to tell guys who I've learned from. I'm like, go to Dan, watch Dan's stuff. He'll teach you what you need to know. It's really easy to get into that, dive into that. And so I put the cameras really close up front, so I'm not putting too much pressure on those bucks. And then from there, I'm trying to backtrack them. And again, it sounds weird, but the bucks that I'm getting closer to daylight on that food source, a lot of times are the bucks that are living closer, and they might be in that primo bedding, but they're setting up with the wind, and usually that means they're extremely untouchable, as in getting to them. I mean, you're looking at it, you're like, how am I going to get to this buck? He's using the wind to come into the food. He's bedded based on the wind. My access would be here. And on top of that, they're obviously in more cover type terrain. And then even them standing up, generally speaking, tends to be later at night. Like right at last light, they're standing up. And if you're not, right here on them,
Yeah.
you're just not getting them. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not I'm not the perfect bed hunter in the world. So, and I have a tendency to set too far back. So tying into long lining, tying into that, finding bucks that maybe are showing up to the food later, and then backtracking them deeper into the public. One, you're escaping that pressure. Two, you're tracking bucks back farther, and so by escaping pressure, they tend to move more in the daylight, and also they're traveling farther. And by traveling farther to that higher quality food source, they generally have, instead of maybe 50 or 100 yards, maybe they have 100 yards or 300 yards of daylight movement. And that has led me to get on more big bucks than I could even imagine. Just seeing big deer just because of the long lining, and I mean I've been on monsters. I mean 180 to 180 inch, 190 inch, maybe one or two 200-inch deer that they were just unkillable because they were so nocturnal, because they had that primo bedding right next to food, either on public or on private, and trying to catch them was just so next to impossible that instead I was like, I would rather just hunt a 150s or a 160s class that is daylight, because it's more, you have more opportunities on that buck, and it's not at that point you're not hoping and praying.
I got two questions for you, Cody, on the long lining stuff, but then
Yeah.
I want to hear more about your specific story. But
Yeah.
okay, in your experience with the long lining, you're mentioning, these primo, or the more untouchable, the more just really bomb-proof setups where these bucks are finding places that are close to the food source, that the wind is either swirling, they have some sort of visual advantage, and then it's forcing other bucks to long line. So are you seeing that as sometimes these long lining bucks are the less dominant bucks, or do you think it's more personality based?
A little bit of both. I think it's just interchangeable. I've seen
Okay.
bucks that are the, not the top of the age class. So I had a quick example. I had a buck I called Poseidon. I don't know how old he was. There's pictures of him on my site somewhere. That he was really cool buck. He looked like he had tridents either side, and he mass like this, crazy mass. I mean, had to be 6-7 inch bases, or if not more. I mean, he was just palmated. Called him Poseidon. He was very obviously a super old mature buck. He lived close to food in the primo bedding. It was basically between the ravine and how he set up, and then there was a clear cut. I mean, it would have been almost impossible to kill this buck. And I tried. I have a couple pictures of him. He just was too hard to get on, and it had been like, yeah, I would love to kill that buck. And he didn't score the highest. He probably 40s or 50s, but there was other
Just a
bucks that,
badass.
like a badass, an old, big, huge-bodied buck. And then there was other bucks that were, actually bigger, that I chased, like the Caesar buck that was farther away, and he would score better, and he was the dominant buck for that area, that pocket. But I would still get pictures of him all the way up there feeding in that predominant food source, but he wasn't in the primo bedding. So I think it honestly just comes down to buck's personality, and if they're a subdominant buck, and we obviously know that the bucks that aren't ultra aggressive tend to live longer. So I think that where it comes down to just individuality. But again, it's just you being out there looking at multiple pockets at that longer distance, and then maybe this one doesn't have the buck you want to shoot. This one has like a 120 in it, and then this one's like, oh, here's my 140 to 160, something like that. But like I said, I will say that because they're going farther to food, they're farther away, and it's probably a little bit to do with the subdominant bucks, that getting on that 180 plus out here where I should be able to in Iowa, or seeing them. If you look through the channel, I have some pictures of some of those bucks, but truly getting on them and filming them, I seem to be capped real hard at that 150 to low 70s range, just because I'm just not in the highest quality genetics. The bucks are moving farther, they're expending more energy, yada yada yada, so on and so forth. But you know what?
But
I'm not going to complain about that at all. They're plenty big enough for me. So
hey, a mature buck is a mature buck, and that's what we're trying to learn about. My last question for you there is those bucks that are coming from a further distance, and I'm assuming moving up some sort of ridge or whatnot. Are you noticing that they've obviously got a much longer distance to kind of stage, play out their daylight, as you mentioned? Are you seeing more sign, more clusters of rubs where they're kind of like coming up to a point? Like, do you find that when you're scouting those bucks and they are long lining, they're giving you more of like a, oh shit, here's the rub line? Like, it's more easy to figure it out, or are they making about the same amount of sign as those bucks that are living closer to the food source?
um I think they're probably equipped making the same amount of sign. The difference is that a buck closer to food source, when he's making it on the transition area near the food and near his bed, those spots are closer together, so it seems like more. Versus when you
Gotcha.
break them apart, it's the same amount, but there's a big, I wouldn't say a gap, but maybe only a couple rubs that you'd really have to distinguish, are those his in there. And so I'll do that. We'll come across a big rub a lot of times, and I'll have to backtrack it where it'll take me a day where I'm spider webbing out trying to figure out, and I'll find rubs and follow it and then go off into bedding. And I'm like, no, there's not big sign here. So it's not his. Come back, go. And I'll keep doing that, just spending that day until I find, okay, I found another big rub and another one and another one. And then here's that pocket where there's that big sign. And I'm like, this would be the bedding. Here's the food. Generally, I have an idea of the food because you just run a camera on it. And yeah, it's 3 a.m. pictures, but you're like, hey, there's a big deer there. He's coming from somewhere. And so the hardest part is backtracking them. And once you figure that out, then you get on them and that sign's there and in that pocket. So I would say
But
it's probably the same amount of
that's a
sign. It's just spread out.
That's 100%. I would consider that 100% an advantage, though, for a guy who can put in the time scouting, or like who likes to scout. I love spending time scouting. Having those breadcrumbs be further spread out is harder for other people to pick up on. Whereas that buck who's living closer and has just massive amounts of sign within a 200-yard area, it's so much easier to let people fixate on that one that is going to bust them every time. I'll go figure out this one who's got this scantily clad rub line moving back. Like, that's one way to like get rid of a little bit of pressure, right? You lose a little bit because it's a little bit tougher to pick up those breadcrumbs. So
Yep.
I would see that as a big advantage also.